pause at even Onkale's timescale. If he jumps back in our time machine, you need to travel backwards at the rate of 1 year per second for over 60 years. Get back to the point when Okinawato was last geologically active. But while Aikas would recognize the brilliance of Okinawato's stability, it would take him 2.5 decades to see construction begin. First, it took until 1983 for the Finnish government to officially license the project. Then it was another 6 years before they passed a law forcing nuclear companies to put aside money for it. It wasn't until 1993 rolled around that serious examination of candidate sites could begin, and an additional 7 years before this site was finally chosen. Finally, in 2004, construction began on Onkalo. By that time, Aikas had been working on the project for 24 years. He'd gone from youthful 29-year-old wunderkind to a middle-aged 53-year-old expert. It might have taken less than half a minute in our time machine, a joke compared to the timescales we're discussing today, but for Aikas himself, it represented an entire lifetime. Perhaps the craziest part is that back in 1980, Aikas had fully expected there to be plenty of high-level waste repositories all over the world by the time Onkalo began construction. The official Finnish position has even been to wait and see how the German, British, and American repositories worked out, and then steal the best bits for their own design. But over that quarter century, all the other projects had collapsed, rendered politically toxic by locals kicking up a storm about living near radioactive sludge. Only in Finland alone, where local communities were not only consulted but also given a veto over the project, was work able to proceed. Ground was broken on the site in 2004, and with that, the fate of Okinawato Island was sealed for the next 100,000 years. The process of creating Onkalo was a long and slow one. Excavations were done by drilling holes in the rock face, filling it with explosives, and then blasting chunks away at a time. This was followed by dragging the waste rock away and washing the new walls, sealing them with insulation, and anchoring them with cement-bolt steel bars to stop the whole thing falling down. It was a painfully time-consuming process, explaining why the site still isn't finished even today. The most recent estimate we could find is that things will be ready to start practice runs for handling nuclear waste in 2022, but it may be that the coronavirus has delayed things on that front. Still, the project has already reached its maximum depth of 450 meters. In 2015, the Finnish government granted the license to start building the repository itself, as in the tunnels where the waste will actually be stored. Once completed, they will run in a tangle over 60 to 70 kilometers, all condensed in an area around the size of the nation of Monaco. The plan is to finally start shipping in high-level waste there for disposal in 2024. Once that begins, Onkalo will run for the next 100 years. By the time it ceases operations, you, me, and every single person watching this will be dead. Timo Aikas will be a distant memory, as far removed from the men and women working on his project as someone like J.D. Rockefeller is from today. But what will disposing of these spent fuel rods actually involve? Well, the first thing to note is the one simply doesn't just remove a fuel rod and walk it into Onkalo. Each piece of waste that ends up in the tomb will have spent several decades cooling in a pool at an interim storage facility where temperature and radiation levels will slowly decrease. Since these things come out at a staggering 800 degrees Celsius, this is a pretty important step. When enough of these fuel rods are cooled, they'll be bundled together and then placed inside cast iron canisters a meter wide. These canisters, in turn, will be lowered into copper urns 5 centimeters thick and transported to Onkalo. There they will be placed in chambers carved from the bedrock and surrounded by bentonite clay. Once the tunnel has all its canisters, it will be refilled with water-absorbing clay blocks and sealed until all 137 tunnels are closed off. By that time, around the year 2125, 3,250 canisters containing 6,500 tons of high-level waste will have been deposited. The main entrance shaft to Onkalo will be filled with rubble and